Hello, everybody, and welcome to another segment of News Without Prejudice. We are so excited to have you here with us. We've got a lot to report on and talk about today. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing fantastic. Before we get started, everybody, please go to gospelwithoutprejudice.com
yes.
if you want to subscribe. Pledge for as little as $5. We'll keep the lights on. Gets you bloopers if they happen. You get access to our exclusive community. Please go there. Like, comment, share. Subscribe, hit all the buttons, give the show to someone you care for and want to know, inform about current events. It's a big help to us. We actually already have a pretty consistent and growing viewership, which is very cool. But we want to keep that momentum going.
Yeah.
And as a personal favor to us, please just help us out in any way you can.
Much appreciated.
Lindsey, what the hell happened this week? Talk to me about it.
So much. Well, there is Signalgate, but we're going to focus on that for our main episode for this week because I have so many feelings and thoughts about Signalgate. So for now, we're going to get into some other stories that are new and fresh here. So one that really popped out to me is that a judge declared that no air conditioning in a few select Texas prisons was unconstitutional. And then the judge did not order for air conditioning to be installed in these prisons.
I actually saw this story.
Yeah.
And my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding was that the judge... the context of this ruling was that the judge was looking for an injunction, right? And the judge said, this is unconstitutional, but I'm going to decline to order specific action from the state because the air conditioning would take longer to address than the 90-day injunction would allow. And so it was not the proper, my understanding was like, it was a procedural thing.
Yeah.
I don't know, was that the case? Because I saw a lot of media outlets going, oh, the state of the judiciary, so terrible that for this judge to say it's wrong and then not do anything. And judges do that. Yes. We actually have talked about judges who've done stuff like that, like for the gun trace task force and back in episode 3 of season 1, I think. I forget which episode it was, but where the government was charging multiple people multiple times with mutually exclusive stories.
And the judge did not choose to correct that wrong.
Yes.
So this has happened before. But I think that you're right.
Yeah.
In the bureaucratic decisions that need to take place behind this are massive. And one of these particular prisons is really old, and they've had remodeling plans in the works for years now. But it's just such a mess because they're not prepared to solve the problem. But still, the problem has been there for a long, long, long time now. So one specific prison is 201 Poplar in Texas. Many of the administrative offices in this prison closed this week due to AC outage, but the inmates don't have any choice to just stay at home.
They can't send the inmates home.
Yeah, they can't say, oh, well, you go back home for the week because there's no AC. So that's what really gets me is the hypocrisy. I don't know if hypocrisy is quite the right word, but...
the inefficiency. I think this is not the first time that Texas has been in federal. This is a federal case, I presume.
Yes.
Yeah. This sounds like a federal question.
Yeah.
This is not the first time Texas has been in court spending more money on government attorney time arguing against air conditioning than it would cost to just replace the air conditioning to begin with.
That's
Texas,
painful.
To some parts of Texas, particularly where they've built the penitentiaries, which is generally where no one wants to be, which is generally in the hottest places of the Texas desert. That's only getting hotter with climate change. You can get up to like 110 outside, and then in concrete buildings built in the 1980s generously, sometimes more in the 1960s, it can get to like 120, 130, which is a human oven.
It's scary.
Without air conditioning.
People can die.
And have.
Nothing is really being done about this.
I mean, I've always said that like a society is judged. If you want to know whether or not you have rights in a society, see how they treat the prisoners. Because if prisoners have no rights, then all the government has to do is find a way to classify you as a prisoner or as a criminal, I should say. Like if a government can prosecute anyone for anything over a long enough time span. So I always advocate for human rights in prisons because it's possible one day something might go horribly wrong and I end up in a prison and I want to belong to a society that treats the vulnerable fairly. Because prison should be about rehabilitation, not just warehousing, which is what we do a lot of in this country. And I think it's partly, I actually empathize with judges here because judges often have very few options. Judges do the sentencing, but the sentencing, they have limited tools, right? It's really just like jail time, probation, fines. That's really some combination of those three things are really all judges can do to criminals once they've been found. Like, that's why criminal diversion courts, which have sprung up at the local level, we have a drug diversion court here in King County, and it was actually one of the first in the nation when it was established, like in 2003 or something like that. It has its problems. We should do an episode on that.
Yeah, let us know.
That's why they're so special, because it gives judges the discretion to send people more places other than straight to prison, right? And the fact that the sentencing guidelines, in the tough on crime 90s and 2000s, judges often did not want to send people to prison, but the sentencing guidelines in many states and at the federal level was like 20-year minimum. And so the judge was like, okay, I'll give you the minimum.
There you go.
That's 20 years. And we are still dealing with the after effects of those decisions nowadays, because that sort of policy plays out in decades, not in years.
Yeah, for sure. But it's slow change.
And I read that, and that really evoked a lot of, like, I'm like, well, I mean, the judiciary is trying here, but...
Yeah, but, I mean, how much can they do in the face of Texas sheriff's offices and the prison system?
Well, the truth is, like, the feds can, like, intervene to help individuals, but, like, in truth, if Texas wants to or any state really is hell-bent on mistreating its prisoners, they're going to mistreat them. I mean,
absolutely.
There's no way, like, the Texas controls every employee within their prisons. They control all the systems. They control all the resources. There's within that environment is already a really limited way to get evidence to court out of that environment.
Yeah, for sure.
And if often it's just the testimony of the prisoners, and prisoners, unfortunately, are not quote unquote credible.
Right, they're not trusted because they're criminals.
because people reason they're criminals.
Yeah.
Therefore, they must be lying about everything. So,
wow.
hey, I wish there was a more concise call to action here, but otherwise, just like, hey, treat people fairly.
Yeah, advocate for prison reform, especially in Texas.
Especially in Texas. But most importantly, to keep people out of prisons, to give the state more options than just like jail, death, or probation.
That sounds great to me.
Yeah.
More options. That sounds really nice.
Do we know when we're going to have more updates on this case? Because it is not concluded.
I do not. Okay. I got no deeper information there, but let us know if you'd like us to follow up on that one.
Yes.
There's another one around Texas here.
Okay. Tell me.
You know about New York's shield laws?
Yes.
This is fascinating. So I'm going to take
I'm going to take a stab at this.
Please do.
So Texas, I think we might have talked about it off camera, but Texas charged, like, if I'm remembering the story correctly, Texas charged a doctor in New York, physically located in New York, who never left the state of New York.
Correct.
With murder or like a involvement in an abortion scheme is what Texas would call it. I don't know the Texas statute.
Specifically the involvement in
facilitating an abortion,
yes,
whatever
exactly.
crime that is. Whatever the hell that means. Yeah, whatever that means. And then it was the first criminal charge that Ken Paxton's office, the Texas State AG, entered under this law, the controversial law that was passed, in 2021? It's fairly recently.
Something like that. This is all fresh.
Yes, very fresh jurisprudence. And I think this was the first time Texas ever tried to enforce it.
Yes, to my knowledge as well.
Because people already to frame this, every state only has access to its own jurisdiction. The state of Texas cannot force the state of New York to do anything, and vice versa. Only the feds can force the states to do things, or else it would be chaos. Only feds can monitor. Usually all falls under interstate commerce or something adjacent. Interstate commerce is like 80% of our society, I've learned. And so Texas probably got a default judgment against this doctor because she was never in Texas. She never showed up. And then I'm guessing they went to New York to try and enforce it, and New York said, "Fuck no."
Exactly.
Okay. What is the actual story, Lindsay? How close did I get that?
You've got it. You've got it on the nose.
Okay.
It came to acting Ulster County, Ulster, that's a very ugly word. Ulster County Clerk Taylor Bruck denied Ken Paxton's attempts to file a motion to enforce. So you're totally right about trying to enforce it in New York. It's a judgment of $100,000.
Okay, so it's a civil enforcement action they've done. So in that case, Texas, generally when you have a judgment of any kind from any lawfully appointed court, you go to wherever the stuff, the assets, or the person is, and you show the local court there, hey, we've got this due judgment. you usually register it with the clerk, or you file, it's usually an action of some kind to some way get court endorsement. And then once that local court issues an endorsement or a parallel judgment by incorporating the other language in the local jurisdiction, then you can go to the local sheriff or whatever law enforcement agency relevant and say, hey, we've got this judgment, help us seize all their stuff. Maybe we'll appoint a special master to liquidate their intangible assets. Maybe we'll put liens on their businesses. That's the enforcement mechanism. Enforcement mechanisms for judgments at the federal and the state level are usually always local matters because those are the courts of general jurisdiction. It can depend, like if it's like for like Coinbase or something, they're regulated at the federal level because they're an interstate financial platform. So there's some variance there. But Ken Paxton basically went to do that. Yeah. And then New York simply declined.
Nope.
Yeah.
And so it's specifically because of New York's so-called shield laws.
Tell me about that.
And so,
I know less about that.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics. A little reminder to folks at home, I don't have a legal background. But from my understanding, these shield laws were installed specifically to protect individuals in New York from crimes that have been committed in other states that are not illegal in New York.
Yeah.
And so it's specifically just stating that these people cannot be prosecuted for these crimes because they're in New York and they didn't do anything illegal via the state of New York.
And importantly, the institutions of the state of New York cannot assist.
Yes.
That's the other important part.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for adding that.
Yeah, because so every state has called long arm statutes, which basically says if there's legal proceedings, if I steal a car in Montana and then I come back to Washington, Montana can reach out to Washington and be like, hey, a citizen of yours fucked with us in various unforeseen ways. Arrest him and extradite him to Montana, to the blue sky, big sky country, and then my prosecution proceeds in Montana. So you can actually get extradited between states like you can between countries. It's just a much less red tape because it's all under the same federal system.
Yeah,
but
I see.
In theory, if the states were to strike their long arm statutes from their books, you could just hide in another state, and if that state refused to voluntarily extradite you, you could get away with anything as long as you made it across the border.
Now that's interesting.
Luckily, there are many laws that prevent that, so that's not actually going to work. But it's interesting to see it play out, particularly when
it's really interesting to see it play out.
It's a reverse long arm. It's a short arm statute.
Yeah. Exactly.
And what sucks for this doctor is now going to have to. She's safe as long as she stays in New York. But if there are other states that she can't buy a house anywhere else because she were to buy a house in Louisiana or something, Louisiana would be like, sure, attach a lien to the property. Ken Paxton could theoretically come after her until judgment expires. I don't know Texas's judgment expiration dates. Washington judgments last 10 years.
That's a long time.
And then you can renew them. So you can renew them every 10 years.
Wow.
So they have an expiration, but it's quite long.
I see.
So your judgments can be evergreen for, in theory, 40, 50, 60 years.
Jeez.
And they accrue interest.
And this is the same doctor who is also being sued in Louisiana.
Oh, yeah. And that's why I think that's likely, is because this doctor isn't really a doctor. They're the first it's a political question.
Yeah,
so they're making a political spectacle of this involvement, and that's why I'm so worried for this doctor, because the doctor is basically patient zero.
Yeah.
And if this prosecution fails, not prosecution, but if this action against the doctor fails publicly as the first test case, that will be deeply embarrassing for the Ken Paxton's office. So I have no doubt they will have people on this for years to come.
Oh, that's a good point. Very good point.
And that sucks. That's why we talk about politics so much here, is that politics and law are ultimately intertwined, particularly when it comes to the enforcement of the law. So I'm wishing that doctor the best. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Margaret Carpenter. Good luck.
Okay.
That's all we got on that one. Do you hear the Department of Health and Human Services is cutting a bunch of people?
I heard. Tell me the details, because this is one I don't know much about. Yeah.
Okay.
I've heard the whisperings.
So Department of Health and Human Services is cutting approximately 25% of their jobs. That comes from the FDA, the CDC, and the National Institute of Health. And it comes from Mr. Brainworm himself, RFK Jr. I watched a video that he posted on Twitter of him talking about this decision, and it's long. It's 6 or 7 minutes long. It's filled with rhetoric, and it sounds... I don't know. I don't want to. This is a straw man argument, but it sounds like he's still got the brainworm.
we should do an episode
Yeah,
on that.
because he's got a long legal history.
He's got
RFK
a
Jr.
long
does.
legal history, and the context of, I've told you this before, but the context of that brainworm is that he was in a messy divorce against an ex-wife, and he argued in court that he was too disabled because of this brainworm to work, and therefore should not have to pay spousal alimony, etc.
Yeah.
That spouse later committed suicide.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
She is dead. That's why she's not in the news. He put her through hell. It's one of the reasons why I personally do not like RFK Jr. He's a very disgusting personal life. But it's honestly, that's why I don't make brainworm jokes too often, because the context is actually very sad.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't know that.
I know. Sorry to be a bummer. But that's exactly why we do stuff like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And the Department of Health and Human Services, one of its biggest responsibilities is health statistics. And that's what's so scary. Like, when the government has a political agenda and bad stuff might happen from their political agenda, just stop counting, right? We saw the same thing when Trump basically said, there is no COVID in Ba Sing Se back in 2020 or 2019, where he basically just stopped or tried to hinder the collection of data so that he couldn't be blamed for it in the news.
Yeah.
See the same thing happening with Texas, their new abortion ban. A data came out, and I think in the hundreds of women have been injured or killed from childbirth mishaps because hospitals felt hesitant to provide necessary medical care in a timely manner because they're worried about the state coming after them. And so Texas is actually moving right now to shut down the state department that counts those statistics.
Yeah!
So yes,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, which is basically just like, when things are bad, just stop counting.
Stop counting, and then we won't know that they're bad anymore.
Yeah. Or it'll just be harder. Like, people can know, but they know if they don't know how bad it is, it almost doesn't matter.
Oh man, that's rough. One other thing I wanted to mention specifically about this story is this is around 20,000 jobs that are being cut, taken from, I believe, 82,000 down to 62,000. I saw some news outlets reporting that it was 10,000 jobs, not 20,000.
My guess, my uneducated guess without looking into this at all, is that this might be contractors or provisional. So this is an episode in and of itself. But the reason there's so many protections for federal workers is that the government cannot deprive you of property without due process.
Okay.
And government jobs, TLDR, have been held to be property.
Ah, that's interesting.
And so you don't have a right to a government job, but once you're in a government job, you pass your probation, which is usually between 1 and 3 years, depending on the position, agency, context. You now have due process rights before that government can deprive you of property, which in this case is your position, which is why it's so hard to fire a federal worker. I will say, I'm actually not a huge fan of federal workers being really fucking hard to fire.
Because they're flawed just like everybody else.
Yeah, they're flawed just like everyone else, and they're ultimately public servants. I'm not saying it should be easier to fire them than like a public sector worker, but I see no compelling reason why someone couldn't lose their job at the federal government just as easy as they could at any other company.
Yeah, I see.
Maybe that's a commentary for another day, but like, ultimately we do want the government working as hard as possible.
That's for sure.
But reasonable people will differ.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I've got one other story to touch on today.
Lay it on me.
And that is Judge Boasberg and the Venezuelan migrants.
Oh, yes.
There hasn't been a whole lot of movement on this story since the last time we updated it, so I don't have a whole bunch to say here. Just that it went in front of a court of appeals, and 3 judges, 2 of them voted to keep in place Boasberg's temporary block from the Trump administration to use the Alien Enemies Act. So that block is still in place, and no more people can be deported under this.
So that sets up a showdown. Which circuit was that?
I don't know off the top of my head, unfortunately.
Okay. It's possible the DC Circuit Court of Appeals is sort of informally known as the second most powerful, because a lot of the culture, the Supreme Court and the DC Circuit Court of Appeals are sort of they're like right across the street. And
they have lunch together.
Yeah, they have lunch together. They draw a lot of their clerks and staff are drawn from the same places. It's sort of like the informal second. It's the first among equals of the circuit courts.
Got it.
This sets up a showdown for certiorari at the Supreme Court, which granting cert at the Supreme Court just means that a couple of justices voted to hear a case, because Supreme Court takes what cases whatever cases it wants.
Mhm.
Generally, if it's a important political or policy question, or if the circuit courts are split, so like you have the Fifth Circuit and the Ninth Circuit ruling differently, and or circuits can't agree, and it starts to like get disjointed across the country, then the Supreme Court tends to step in to clarify questions. I don't know how that will go. I've
Yeah.
emailed a few professors, and I'm not getting many clear, coherent answers here. Everyone's like, well, on one hand it might this, and then on the other hand it might not.
Yeah.
So, what's interesting, I actually looked into Judge Boasberg, and he is actually a former, like he sat on the FISA courts, if you're familiar.
I am not familiar.
United States
unfortunately.
Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court.
Oh wow.
So so when the government like claims privilege for national security,
Mhm.
courts have great deference towards the executive branch when claiming national security
Yeah.
interests for disclosing information in open court.
Mhm.
But there's a special court. It's established by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978 to review government requests for surveillance warrants, other foreign intelligence gatherings, and sensitive data.
Huh.
So when the Trump administration invoked national security when telling Judge Boasberg that like, hey, we're not going to tell you anything else about deporting these migrants because it's national security. If they're normally that would go before the FISA court, and the FISA court would review the data in chambers off the record just to verify that the data exists. And Boasberg used to sit on the FISA court. So the reason that refusal is so egregious, it's unusual in this context anyways because we're not at war. But if there was any judge qualified and cleared to review national security, it would be the judge in the Venezuelan deportation case.
Yeah. Thank goodness.
Yes, I know. I'm not a huge fan of the FISA court system because it's not transparent. It's not on public record. There's huge deference towards the government. We can't judge anything on its merits because we're not told or shown what the court reviews. So for all we know, it could be completely ineffectual.
That's really interesting.
We should do a whole episode about.
Yeah, I feel like we could talk about that for a long time. Let us know, folks. Let us know what you're interested in hearing and not so interested in hearing.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting time. I think it's just an interesting time to see because now we're approaching constitutional crisis. I'm tepid on declaring a constitutional crisis too often too early.
Yeah.
Because it drains the power from the phrase if you're constantly being like, this is very concerning, but we have not crossed the line yet.
I see.
But we are now approaching it. We'll see whether the Supreme Court is willing to rein in the monster it created because it declared the president basically a law-free zone around the president to execute acts as may needed. That immunity and his unbridled power to pardon basically means he can execute crimes as he sees fits. And then also, since immunity does not extend to his underlings, he can also issue federal pardons for anyone underneath him. So it effectively extends the zone for as far as Trump wants in specifically the shape Trump wants. Yeah, which is not ideal.
Goodness gracious, folks.
I think we're going to wrap up
Yes.
this week's News Without Prejudice. I hope you, I don't want to say enjoyed this commentary, but at least joined us for learning a little bit about the federal judiciary. I think we should do a FISA court.
I feel
episode.
Like that one that sounds like a lot of fun.
Just the history of the FISA courts. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's
it would take a lot of research.
The Patriot Act and post 9/11, the surveillance state has expanded significantly, and we should talk about the erosion of civil liberties more generally. But it's sort of culminated in an apparatus that Trump is now controlling.
Interesting. Okay.
Well, anyone and everyone listening, please, as a personal favor to us, leave us a review, show this to a friend, hit all the buttons, go to gospelwithoutprejudice.com if you want to submit questions, stories, feedback, thoughts, dreams, hopes, fears.
All of the above.
Yep. Pledge of as little as $5 a month, keeps the lights on. Undying gratitude. You get access to our exclusive community, among other things. Support from the show also comes from Hemet Law.
Thank you know the drill. Much,
yeah, thank you very much, Hemet Law, for letting us do this on our weekdays, and also Quimby.
Yes.
Whether you need bar prep, MPRE prep, CLEs for continuing education, Quimby's got you covered. Go to quimby.com. And that is it for today. Lindsey, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you very soon.
Thanks for listening, folks. Bye.